I'm delighted to be joined now by Tim Shipman, the chief political commentator of the Sunday Times, a former colleague of mine. Back in the day, we worked together at the Sunday Express, didn't we, when we were just young whippersnappers?
I know, and look at us now.
Look at you, you're a big, clever author of many books. And this is the latest in your... Well, I thought it was a trilogy. It was going to be a trilogy, and now it's a quartet.
Yes, a
No
tetralogy, as they call it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It could also double up as a weapon. It's a hefty tome, and you basically decided that one book wasn't enough to cover Theresa May to Rishi Sunak, which is understandable.
Exactly. It's taken 7 years, 1,500 pages. It's now 2 books.
From the backstop to Boris. Love that. Now, let's talk about Theresa May first of all. I mean, a little bit forgotten at the moment with everything going on. How would you rate the premiership of Theresa May, Tim?
I mean, not hugely highly if you read the conclusion.
No.
Look, I mean, it is a history book, but at the same time, a lot of what happened in it is kind of still shaping events now. The original Brexit deal that Boris Johnson signed, which is kind of still with us, was 95% Theresa May's work and Oliver Robbins' work. The sort of catastrophic fallings out in the Conservative Party, which were all happening then, they're still with us now.
Yeah. Some things never change.
Some things never change. And it's, What the Theresa May years give us, I think, is a sort of model of almost how not to do the premiership.
Yes. I'm going to come up with a deal behind everyone's back. I'm not going to tell the Brexit Secretary David Davis about it. I'm then going to present it at Chequers and prompt a flurry of resignations that then leads to my tearful demise outside Downing Street.
Yeah, that's broadly it. And, you know, I've interviewed 260-odd people for this book. And everybody who was in a room with Theresa May, ministers, members of her own cabinet, MPs, people who were on her own staff, people in Brussels, not one of them could say with any great clarity or determination what she was really thinking while they were talking to her. No. And she sort of, you know, good leadership is about knowing where you're trying to go, working out a clever way of getting there, and then be able to take everybody else with you. And she seems to me to have failed on all 3 of those counts. And all the people who've replaced her since have failed on at least one of those counts.
Yes, well, let's get on to the people who have replaced her, who, with the greatest respect to Theresa May, are almost more interesting than her sort of chapter in this tale, although it's funny, really, that seems so distant when it consumed so much of our lives at the time. The Brexit wars between 2016 and 2019 were so agonising. And I remember, I'm sure you were at that Downing Street drinks in 2019 after Boris Johnson had won that convincing victory, convincing on 2 fronts for him, but also the evisceration of Corbyn. And we're all having a drink that Christmas going, oh, well, we're in for a nice quiet time. COVID hits. I know you always had a good relationship both with Boris Johnson and indeed Dominic Cummings. Let's get into the truth of this, because Nadine Dorries was in last week sort of talking about the plot and talking about Michael Gove and the dynamics of the so-called cabal that she claims brought Boris Johnson down. What really did bring Boris Johnson down?
Well, look, Dominic Cummings will tell you that he brought down Boris Johnson, and anyone who reads Book 4, which is out in June, will see a lot more detail on that than I think we've had before. But I also remember a great quote by a minister the week that Boris left Downing Street, who said, Boris Johnson is the 3rd Prime Minister in a row to have been brought down by Boris Johnson.
Yes.
So there were sort of faults on both sides.
Yeah.
Look, the one time politics was done properly in this country was in the second half of 2019, where those 2 men together knew exactly what they were trying to achieve and set out with a plan to achieve it. And despite all the shenanigans we'd seen in Parliament, which populate this book, they were able to push it through and win a big majority. But those 2 were already at each other's throats by the January of 2020, even before Brexit had happened at the end of that month. And when COVID hit, they then fell out spectacularly and the whole government fell apart. And Boris Johnson, having given huge amounts of power to Dominic Cummings, they didn't want another aide to have the same kind of dominance and sort of say over him. And so the teams that followed were not terribly effective. Boris Johnson was a great campaigner, a great politician in lots of ways, but he wasn't a great governor. And he had these ideas and he didn't follow through on them. And ultimately, his premiership was a sort of missed opportunity, I think, for the Conservative Party. And a bit like Margaret Thatcher sort of had a shadow over the Tories for 2 decades thereafter, it looks at the moment like the shadow of Boris Johnson, and the debate about should he have been removed or what was he going to achieve is going to take the Tories up a cul-de-sac for several more years to come.
Do you think he will stage a Cincinnati-style comeback, and when do you think he'll do it?
Well, look, the people around him would say, look, at the moment he's making lots of money, he's very passionate about Ukraine, he's off doing things he's interested in, he's in no rush to return. I think the scenario in which they imagine that might become a possibility is not sort of straight after the general election or even before it, but if you get a new leader in who tries for 2 years, either from the One Nation wing or from, much further to the right, we all assume it will be someone further to right that will take over after the election. If that person is failing 18 months, 2 years down the line, the clarion calls at that point for, well, where's the guy who won us some elections? That's the moment where, if it is at all possible, that it looks like that's the sort of window of opportunity, and that he could come back in and try and take on Starmer, at an election in 5 years' time. And one of the reasons Boris Johnson fell, I think, is that he just didn't rate Keir Starmer. He was, 6 points behind? He always told people, remember when I started running for mayor, I was 17 points behind Ken Livingstone, and I beat him. He thought 6 points behind, given what had happened, was sort of 15 points ahead, really, in the current context. He couldn't conceive of not beating Keir Starmer, who he didn't rate at all, and he assumed everybody else would conclude the same in his own party, and of course they didn't, and that's another of the reasons why he's not with us any longer.
I mean, if he did sort of stage the comeback a bit later on, who's your pick for interim party leader? Because we know that Rishi Sunak won't be hanging around if the result of the general election is as bad as the pollsters predict. Indeed, before I ask you that, actually, do you think he's in jeopardy after the May elections? I
think potentially, yes. He's talking about potentially trying to call an election to try and stave that off. Look, there are lots of people who don't want Rishi Sunak to lead their party into a general election. They come from lots of different sort of factions in the party. I think at the moment, the plot, such as it is, isn't yet kind of got
but people are talking
enough
about
support.
It's penny or pretty. Do you buy that?
Well,
what about Badenoch? What about Suella?
Look, I think Kemi Badenoch has been the favourite for long enough that everybody's now sniping at her and saying why she shouldn't be the favourite. I think Priti Patel has been quite clever behind the scenes. She's still popular with the sort of Eurosceptic right, but has kept her nose clean. She's not associated with the Sunak part of the government at all, which even Suella Braverman was to a degree. And I think she's been quite clever at not joining some of the pylons of Sunak. She's been a little bit more loyal, so some in the sort of One Nation-y ring of the party might regard her as more palatable than Suella Braverman. I think Suella will have a hard core of support, but whether it's big enough to get past all the others, I don't know. I mean, Penny Mordaunt remains the most likely alternative to one of those ladies on the right, I think. Because she's, to a large degree, even now, a bit of a blank slate, and if people can wish what they want onto her...
I know, but that may be part of the problem.
Well, that
people don't know what she stands for either.
Well, and that will be the argument against her. But, we've seen briefing from some of the people, the plotters who say, well, maybe she's the answer. I think some of those would like her to take over, lose the election and then disappear again and pave the way.
She might be good in opposition because she's so good at the dispatch box. She's good at the dispatch box and she's a good campaigner, but she's one of those politicians who, you see over a number of years and really... however often you see them, you're still a little unsure as to what it is that really motivates them. Let's spend the final 2 minutes on Rishi Sunak, because you've written a piece in the Sunday Times today to accompany the publication of the book. We are basically accusing modern politicians of being really bad at politics. And I think we can both agree he's hardworking, he's diligent, he's a good bloke.
All of those things.
But is he a good politician?
I mean, I don't think that he's proven that he is. No. And there's quite a lot of evidence.
I mean, is he in fact a terrible politician? But a good person?
That would be the argument of quite a large number of his MPs. I think when he came in, he tried to settle things down, and that looked quite sensible. He got a lot of credit for getting his head down. The Windsor deal he did on Brexit would not have appealed to all MPs, all viewers of your channel. But as a sort of serious piece of, kind of dedicated work in the weeds, it was quite impressive in its way. But since then, he's veered from one, when things didn't start working out and the polls didn't narrow, he lost his nerve a bit, and he's veered from one strategy to another in a kind of desperate search for something that works, and he doesn't seem to have found it. And, I think... he's certainly lacking the where are we going. And I think what MPs want to see is a sense of telling the country where we're going. You know, if there were another 5 years of Rishi Sunak, what would it all mean? And I think if he ever knew what that was, I don't think he's communicated that effectively to the public.
Final cue. Shipper's general election prediction, please. Are we talking about a super majority for Labour, just a majority, maybe a hung parliament? What are you thinking? Well,
look, if you take history and the focus groups that say that Keir Starmer still hasn't persuaded the public, the natural kind of feeling of where political gravity ought to settle is a decent but not enormous Labour majority. But this government is making it a lot easier for Keir Starmer than that. And while everyone says political gravity will reassert itself and things will narrow, it hasn't yet. And if we carry on remotely like this, then it's going to be a pretty stonking majority.
Actually, I have one more question. Nigel Farage, is his future here or in America?
I think it could be here. I think he's interested in realigning the right here. I would be surprised if he puts his head above the parapet and goes back and leads the Reform Party. I think he's far more interested in what happens after the general election, where you might see Tory MPs joining Reform or him rejoining the Conservative Party.
Chance would be a fine thing, but then nothing would surprise me after what we've witnessed. And you first started writing these books, and this is the latest one, out now. It's praise for All Out War on the back, but this one, of course, is called No Way Out. And the next one is called...
Out.
Out.
Which covers both Brexit and 3 Prime Ministers.
Love that. Tim Shipman, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lovely to see you. Reunited. Sunday Express reunited on GB News, which is always good.